myself as being here, and Jen as being here. And Susan is here in her capacity as an ex officio, as the chair of the SAC. And we also then have Missy Wrigley, a SAC member who is in attendance. And of course, we have Brian and we have the capable assistance of Jolie.
You got it. I do attendance. Matt is, as soon as the meeting starts, Matt's not here, technically.
Oh, okay. Right, okay. He had just said at the beginning for me to announce when that's gonna go. When
You
we're gonna
got it.
start.
Yep. We just
All
gotta
right,
let him know to start streaming, Jeff. That's he'll start streaming the YouTube live stream as soon as we call to order. That's why. So he wants to be ready to do that. So whenever we start a meeting, we kind of let him know that we're gonna start it just so he'll start the live stream.
Okay, so let's call the
Thank you.
meeting, let's call the meeting to order. And we can have Matt start the live stream.
Awesome.
And it is on my clock here on my computer, 11:07. And we were favored with the provision of an agenda from Jolie this morning. And the first matter we've called to order, we have the attendance taken, and we're going to ask to see if there's any public comment. I know the agenda produced the call-in number and a participation code. Do we have anybody that wishes to participate?
I do not have anybody on the line for public comment on the phone. No.
Oh, okay.
Thank you,
Of course,
Jeff.
if anybody joins during the course of this, we'd be happy to hear from them. It's not that we are, excluding people if they're not here at the beginning, so we'd like to hear from everybody. All right, so given on the agenda that we have, we're going to talk about the bills of interest related to special education and written testimony responses from the SAC. I wanted to thank Brian for all the hard work he's been doing on this. I've been a little bit, my time has been competitively taken up by a number of things. But what I did this morning was like I don't know if you guys even got it yet, but I sent an email out this morning. And what I wanted to do was I had just mentioned as a recap the what we talked about yesterday. I know yesterday at the full SAC meeting, we mentioned the distribution of the letter that we had sent. So I attached it to the email this morning, and we can have it go out to anybody who's on the SAC and of course any member of the public. I also in the email that I sent this morning, I attached a number of I'm trying to find it on my screen here. I attached a number of comments. So I attached a copy of the letter, and of course I reemphasized it yesterday. I talked about section 6, and Brian was very good in saying that that the bill that we talked yesterday, 1200, had much more than just the seclusion, which is true. And he brought up a couple of good things. And so we certainly are following 1200 as it's the substitute bill. I think the substitute only pertained to section 6, which was the seclusion section. But for example, as Brian raised, or has been raised, that there is a section 4 that calls for an American Sign Language interpreter at PPTs that calls for the inclusion of an interpreter at a PPT when needed. And that in our letter, we had requested that we also have an American Sign Language interpreter as needed as well as a PPT. There were some other things besides the seclusion. Then there was another bill that Brian brought up yesterday, which is Bill 6883. And I started to look at it this morning, and there's like 30 pages of that. In the email I sent to you guys this morning, I attached the link for that.
Jeff, just jumping in real quick. So
yeah.
I was informed that that bill did not make it out of the Ed Committee.
Oh, 6883. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So I don't know. I'm trying to get more information on that, but our legislative liaison let me know yesterday that it's still its own bill, but it was voted out with no substitute language.
So what does that mean, Brian? If you could help me with that. I know that it came out as is then?
It means it didn't make it out. It's not in play at the moment. It was voted out of of being moved forward.
Okay, I'm
Can
on
I-
the, go ahead, anybody.
Can I ask a question? I'm sorry, I don't know if it's all right for me to ask, but
Yeah.
in the chat yesterday, Tom Kosker said that he thought that the 6883 was going to be rolled into the 1200. So I didn't know if that was going to take place at all or not.
So again, I don't want to speak out of turn here, but it's what I would advise today is to not review that bill since it didn't come out. And it doesn't mean that parts of it won't show up somewhere else, but it hasn't been folded into the 5100 that we're aware of. But for example, like things happen through the course between now and the end of the legislative session where maybe a section of that language ends up in a different bill or in a different place, but the bill as a whole was voted out. So it did not move forward. So for your purposes today, I would focus on, you know, the other bills. We would keep that in mind again and keep an eye out for any future information on that. But I know the Ed Committee has requested to meet with the State Department of Education this week.
I'm going to admit that I have a hole in my understanding of the legislative process, and I'm on the website for the Connecticut General Assembly, and for Bill 6883, it says that on March 27th, it was filed with the Legislative Commissioner's Office, and on March 24th, there was a joint favorable. So I've gone to the Education Committee section as well, and I'm looking at the minutes of the March 24th, and it says the representative called for motion to JF to the floor on HB 6883. There was we support, we this, that, whatever. The motion for joint favorable to the floor on 6883 was added to the consent calendar.
It was since pulled from that,
yeah.
and at least that's my understanding. So again, if there's differing information on that, I could try to take that back, but I'm just communicating what was.
No, I
you know,
understand.
Yeah.
I understand fully. I just, and there could very well be a lag on the website as to what the history is here, so,
There could be, yeah. So, like I said, Jeff, we'll keep an eye on it. I just think for the purposes of today, I would
Yep.
advise not to dig too deeply into that until we
Right.
clarify that.
okay, yeah,
And
no,
I would focus on the substitute language in 1200, which was on the agenda. Because if you look at the Ed Committee's agendas last week, 6883 was not on either of those agendas for those sessions that they held. Which is, which is interesting because like you just read,
Yeah, that's, let's see. I'm looking at the agenda for the Education Committee for last Friday, March 24th, and 6883 is on the agenda. According to the online agenda now again, but anyhow, so.
From last Friday?
From last Friday, March 24th.
Okay.
It says 6883 raised and that concern, so, that's for the Education Committee.
Okay.
Anyhow, but I think your
Well,
comments.
it sounds like I have my signals crossed then, but I'll check back in with our.
But I think your thoughts are well taken that we should, not spin our wheels on that if in fact it's off, and we're
Yep.
going to meet again and get to it.
Yeah.
Jeff,
ahead,
I have a
anybody?
question. I have a question, or actually what our goal is today. Is it to take the letter we wrote and then the changes that have been made and make those two mesh? So if they've already made the change or they haven't made the change, if public comment is over, the only way you can reach it is to reach your legislator, correct?
Yeah, no, I think you're raising a good point, what our goal is for today, and I think that's super. I just kind of was like doing kind of bringing us up to where we are right now. But
No, I was just my brain had just stopped and I was like, so what should we be doing today? Sorry,
yeah,
Jeff.
no, I agree with you. I don't, Brian, let me ask you. So according to the I'm looking at, so we do
Jeff,
have.
so I'm just texting now as we're going through here. I read voted out with no substitute language, like as it was voted out. like in the negative, but it sounds like with clarification, it means it was voted to go forward, like voted out of ed committee with no substitute language.
Okay,
So, so I apologize for the mix up there. So just for clarification, it did go, it was voted by the, out of the ed committee moving forward without any substitute language. So as is.
okay. So then in the, so going back to Susan's, great question for the, so for the 1200, as of the 27th, which was Monday, that was filed with the Legislative Commissioner's office. And that was the substitute language.
Yeah,
that we're aware of.
language if you find that helpful.
Yeah, and that was just sent a little while ago, right?
Yeah, just a few minutes ago.
Okay. Thank you for that. And then I have the right, so pursuant to your summary, I got to tell you, my eyes kind of rolled back in my head when you were talking about the federal funds and the grant calculation. That's just not in my wheelhouse. The section 2 about the remote learning and IEPs, as you indicate, allows school board to provide remote learning as part of the dual instruction. And I think you had mentioned that yesterday. When required to implement a student's IEP or 504 plan, special ed task force. It added 5 topics to the special ed services and funding task force to study, and we've enumerated them. It adds 2 new members to the task force, which kudos to everybody that pushed for that. The advisory council has added a member. Thank you, Brian, for doing that, and everybody. There's a deadline that was moved. Translation services, section 4. I don't have to repeat everything that you've said, and you've done a bullet point on that. So let me ask a question then, following up on what Susan said. Given the fact that Bill 1200 is where it is right now, I guess then it's out of the committee and now it's going to go to the full legislature. Is that correct, Brian?
So it's out of the committee with substitute language proposed. So yeah. So now there's opportunity to review your original testimony and see if there's any adjustments needed based on the substitute language.
Okay, and then go ahead.
I just had a question because I was reading the substitute language and it says, when they're talking about the same day notification, which we said that should happen, what is the definition of reasonable effort? Because it says further, the administration is to make a reasonable effort to provide this notification immediately. Do you, Brian, is there a reasonable effort definition in your office?
That's for the attorneys to, there's no definition of it. Yeah.
Because I know that, and whenever something says best practice or reasonable effort, it doesn't always happen.
Yeah, I think what it comes down to in those circumstances are an individual kind of look at the facts, like it's a reasonable effort, from the, yeah, I mean, it could be interpreted a million different ways, probably depending on your perspective. But when looking at each individual circumstances and the facts around it, was it, reasonable in the time, in the time fashion? So there may be circumstances that are out of the control of the individual or the school at those times but we don't have a definition of what that means.
Okay. Jeff, do you have a legal definition? Because you are the expert.
Well, I kind of agree with what Brian says. It's probably going to be fact-based, based upon the totality of the circumstances. I will say by comparison, the Freedom of Information Act says that when somebody requests records, they're supposed to be promptly. But the Freedom of Information Commission had issued the advisory opinion number 51 that said, let's address what the word promptly means. And basically it said, we're going to go and look into the totality of the circumstances. They're going to consider all the workload that the public agency had as far as trying to get the information and how important it was and how quickly it was needed, et cetera. So I think it would be a fact-based thing. I would point out that in the Bill 1200 Section H, which is that has the thing about the reasonable effort, It says that the local, I just call it the district, the local or regional board of education shall notify a parent or guardian who's placed in physical restraint, seclusion, or timeout on the day that such physical restraint or seclusion or timeout. So we know that it has to be no later than the day, and shall make a reasonable effort to provide such notification immediately after this. So we do know that the reasonable effort can be no longer than the same day as. So we do know that. Then it's just a question of, how quickly, I think.
So Missy suggested that wording, documentation of all efforts, and because I'm reading that wonderful update you gave us, Jeff, and I guess that could be should be say for the administration to make a reasonable effort to provide this notification immediately, as well as documentation of all reasonable efforts. Is that what you're suggesting, Missy? Because I'm not the expert.
Yeah, I mean, when I was teaching, the one thing that we always had to do is document everything. So if we contacted parents about a meeting, we had to document with dates when that contact happened, what was the result of that contact, because otherwise, you don't know. If you say reasonable, well, what does that mean? Well, I attempted to contact them 5 times. I've called, I've emailed, I've done this and this and this. And so just having some of that conversation, but it was always stressed to us that you need to document it. And then whoever the powers that be will determine if you did enough to count.
All right, so I mean, that's certainly something that we could add. And then the question I would have overall, I'm not going to go from this. We're going to come back to this as far as what we asked that. But my question, I guess, then Brian, just as a procedural thing, let's say that we go through today and we come up with some things that we would like to include to come out of our legislative committee that we want to do, such as requiring documentation of the quote unquote regional effort. Where do we send that? Because it's out of committee. We send it to the entire legislature, or what's that?
I'll get back to you on that, Jeff. If you send me your finalize, I'll work with Laura on that to let you know. But I think she gave you a connection to the Ed committee to reach out to them directly. So yeah, I would say we would resubmit just like you did the first one, but I'll confirm that. Okay, yeah, all right. So okay, thank you so much for that. Okay, so thoughts, guys, on the bill 1200. Of course, what they did was they reinstituted the idea of seclusion. We had asked for a task force to study it, not the immediate removal. Does anybody have any thoughts on some comments they would like to make if you've had a chance to look at this?
I still think adding the task force is a good idea if that's something that is doable to add, or can we really still give feedback that might be listened to? But you know what I mean? Because I don't want to go through the effort of writing a letter if there isn't an avenue to change anything. And this is where if we had a better understanding of the clear path for the bills and what comes next and where we can give feedback or not, it would be helpful.
I believe next.
There's
Go ahead, Brian. Go ahead. You know more.
There's opportunity to comment on the substitute language.
Okay.
It's probably unlikely to add things in that aren't there, less likely. But that doesn't mean you can't reiterate that point. I would take the time to reiterate the points that are important to the council, but at this time they're hearing feedback on the substitute language.
Okay.
Okay, so what does the our group think about so we are going to be sending a follow-up letter. We know that for sure. And we know that we're going to suggest this seclusion back in, that as an alternate thing, that there be a task force sent to study that. Thoughts on that?
I think though the language they have is okay, right? But I would my suggestion was to add a task force also, because then in the future we can be, better positioned to have a plan to support the complete elimination of it, hopefully one day.
That's beautifully worded. Anyone write that down?
So what are you suggesting, Jen? Since the seclusion is back in and you're saying you're okay, well, you're not,
I'm,
you want,
no, I'm not, I'm not saying
not
I'm
okay,
okay.
but it's there, okay.
I'm just saying, like we had in our letter.
Okay, so there'd be an ongoing task force to study it as it proceeds, so that later on, we would have some data if we wanted to remove it in a future time.
Yes.
Okay,
So basically, we can just take what we had in our other letter and reiterate it. And I would say the same thing for the sign language interpreters, because we wanted to include those families. And I think it needs to be, even though they have it right already, but it should be explicit.
Yeah, because they're saying if you don't speak English, and obviously they're speaking English, but it's a different form of communication that requires an interpreter. And it's interesting is House Bill 6883 also has that in section 3 about the right to have translators. They use different wording. It's duplicate language, so it's going to get taken out of one of the bills. So I think we should add section 3 of House Bill 6883 since it's moved on. And in another, like say, this is also in section 3 of House Bill 6883, in case they keep that one and get rid. Maybe I am. Okay, I just am looking at a fasterdemocracy.com, and it says section 3, allow translators to attend planning and placement team meetings and for the individualized education program and other documents to be translated to the primary language of the student or family. So the allow translators to attend planning and placement meetings is, I think they do need to specify.
And it shouldn't be
language.
allow. That's kind of weird language.
Yeah.
To put in a bill.
Right.
And I think.
Oh wait, wrong thing. Wrong, Susan. Sorry. I need reading glasses, and that's very sad. Okay. I'm scrolling. This is another gigantic bill.
so I have 6883 out in
Do
section.
you want me to share, my screen with the bill language for you?
Yeah, do you have it? Because I'm scrolling down and I can't figure out where that is.
Are you talking about Senate Bill 1200?
No, HB 6883.
I don't see anything in section 3 about sign language.
Interesting.
No, that talks about, I think you're referring to the
So you think okay, all right. So I will not look at Fast Democracy because they gave me an overview of this bill, and it says that section 3 allows an act concerning students with developmental disabilities, and it has section 3 allow translators to attend. So I don't know where that would be. Section 10.
Yeah.
Squirrels.
I could 1200 for you, and
Yeah, I don't see it.
6800.
You're right. I don't see it in the main wording of the bill, so I think I'm wasting everybody's time with this. I'm just reading
No,
this.
not a waste. I mean, we could go through if you wanted to look at 6883. We could do a quick summary of all the sections, but I just want to make sure you all have it to
It might have been a
reference.
typo. So section 13, subsection 10C says, such parent, blah, 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 have a right to be present, have a right to such child or pupils, if any, and a translator automatically provided by the responsible local or regional board of education if there is an apparent need or upon request of such parent guardian. So maybe there was a typo. It's not section 3, it's section 1.
Oh, section 13. Yeah, it's probably section 13. Thank you for your wonderful brain for finding that.
So take a look at, is that the one you meant? So take a look at.
So am I correct? Does that seem like overlapping laws in a way?
I would just again say these laws already all exist. And they're just kind of explicitly, these are all federal laws that exist, but they're putting it in state.
So far, what we want to have is for 1200, we want to put document the reasonable effort. We want to say that we want to have an ongoing task force to study this. We also want to reinforce the presence of sign language when necessary. and cross-referencing 6883 for a similar recognition of that right.
Beautiful.
All right, and I'm gonna throw this all together too, so we don't have to worry about the exact language. I'll do it and send it to everybody. Other thoughts?
So we got through, I'm looking at your beautifully written thing. So are we now on section 6 that you wrote? And Missy, do you have this? Jeff sent us this morning the letter we had put together, and then he sent what the changes are in the bill. And does that make sense? Did you get that
No,
email?
I just have what Brian sent. I have the 1200, and so I'm looking at the substitute language. It's there. So I have what Brian sent out.
Okay, so I'm going to send it to you.
I just did, Susan.
Oh, you're wonderful. Thank you.
You're
And
welcome.
I do have Bill 6883. I printed that out. So
Okay.
There's a lot of paper.
well, I have to read it a hard
Understand.
copy as opposed to reading it off the computer. So.
I know, you have to make notes and you have to highlight. Me too.
Jeff, why don't you go down the document you did and make sure that to see what we have to change or we need to respond to, because you.
All right, so as far as the change to section 6, the things were that it put seclusion back. Okay, we know that. It also said it had same day. We've spoken about that already. To communicate, it also talks, one of the things they also changed was instead of requiring a meeting, which seemed to imply that there had to be a physical in-person meeting, it said that the meeting that had to be held could be by either they articulated in person, by telephone, or through, quote, online technology platform, end quote. So you could do that. It said that the meeting had to be held within 5 days. That continued. But it also said that the requirement for a meeting would be triggered not only by seclusion and restraint, but also if there was a timeout. However, the difference was, whereas the need or requirement of a meeting for seclusion or restraint was triggered with per incident, it was only triggered when there had a 30-day period. So two things. Number one is they inserted a meeting requirement for timeout, but as far as the triggering event, it was 3 per 30 as opposed to each one.
So does it have explicit language about requiring documentation of timeouts and what that should include? Because currently there's a requirement to document for restraint and seclusion, but not for timeouts.
Let's see, I'm just reading my note. During the course of the meeting, the board is to give a detailed summary of the events that led to the action, including the names of any witnesses and an explanation for the reasons why the steps were taken. I can confirm that I have to go to that bill to
Yeah, because it looks like the required documentation is still for restraint and seclusion. So I don't know if it needs to explicitly say, because it doesn't say. I don't know. Does the language say that the CSDE must disaggregate the data for timeouts too, or is it just restraint and seclusion?
I'm looking.
It's all three. They've added all three.
It's all three. Okay, so then you would
yeah,
be
go ahead.
adding that to the reporting requirements. Is that what would happen for timeouts, and it would go through CC-SEDS as well?
Well, we would that would take some time to do, but
Yeah.
it could, it could. What I would say for the advisory council to consider is that 2 of those procedures are emergency and 1 is part of a behavior management strategy. So should they be all reported in a similar fashion?
And it talks about when you have to have meetings. Jen, for you, it says the board shall provide such parents or guardians with a detailed summary of the events leading up to and during such physical restraint, seclusion, or timeouts, including the names of any witnesses of such physical restraint, seclusion, or timeout, and their accounts of such events, and an explanation for the reasons for the use of such physical restraint, seclusion or timeout. So that's good there.
Yeah.
Going
Yeah,
to
because
subsection,
restraint and seclusion are not behavior strategies. They're not in plans. They're not part of any of that, whereas timeout is. Or could be.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but if it is in a plan, then data needs to be collected on when it's used, how long it's been used, because one of the big things that we talk about with the new IEP and our progress monitoring is we need to know if the strategies we're utilizing are actually working. And we can't know if they're working if we don't have the data to prove that they're working. So, you know, I think that through the conversation that we have about progress monitoring with the IEP, if indeed we're doing, you know, if timeout is part of a strategy that has to be utilized for a student or that is being utilized, then we need the data to show if that is indeed working or not.
I'm calling attention to, again, the substitute bill 1200 and section 6, and I'm looking at subsection J. And it talks about after July 1st of 2023, each local or regional board, and it goes shall, 1, record each instance of the use of physical restraint, seclusion, or timeout on a student. 2, specify whether the use of seclusion was in accordance with an individual education plan, so seclusion only.
That should be
3,
deleted.
pardon?
That should be deleted.
Which part should be deleted?
What you just read.
So we should
Because
take-
seclusion can't spin changes where seclusion can't be part of the IEP.
Okay, so we could make that comment.
That's just a note for you to,
Okay,
there's some
Specific-
inconsistencies and like cleanup that needs to be done as previous legislation was passed.
so should we include that? As a notation that should be
We did
deleted?
alert them to that, but if you're, yeah, absolutely. If you'd like to reinforce that piece.
And I also want to go back to what we were saying about recording and documenting the timeouts. And I think it is critical to document those. I'm trying to think of a way to capture that information and not make it as burdensome to do, because unfortunately the exclusionary timeouts are used to a greater extent than we probably know. So sometimes it might just happen, you know, once or twice, but there are families I've spoken with that it's happening multiple times a day. And without documenting it, there's no way to know how many times, how much time the student is, you know, missing instruction. Are they constantly missing it from the same class every day? Is it always with the same staff person? So I think that data would be very useful information. And if you had to document it every time, it might not be the first thing you go to.
We actually, in the letter that was written, we actually have exclusionary timeouts should be documented in frequency, duration, location, and reason, and shared with parents. Currently, there is no such requirement. So you want to put something in addition to that? So Jeff,
No,
we're
it's
in your
already-
letter.
It's
They
in there. It's
already-
in there.
Okay,
It's in there.
It's
okay.
the additional piece, Susan, is that they're saying to report that to the state.
oh, and so Jennifer's saying without being so burdensome. Okay, because
Yeah, so I was
think
just
we
saying that, like, yeah, so just to consider that, because we don't collect other behavior management techniques
Mhm.
for students. We do collect the emergency restraints and all those pieces, so I'm just saying it's just something to reflect on. That
But
piece,
it's
'cause that
also
would-
not, like, timeouts are not always used like as an intervention or whatever you're, you know, trying to call it. Sometimes it's used as an informal discipline. So that's the concern I have again
Yeah,
about
I don't-
documentation.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I'm just going by the definition of how it's
Mhm.
stated in the legislation.
Yeah, and yeah, that's why I'm just trying to think of it from like all those different angles. I guess my thought is, yes, it should be documented. And as far as reporting it to the state, maybe you guys could know the number, but you don't need to know all that other stuff, as long as parents understand. So if they have the information, that, they are an informed member of the planning and placement team and can, better be ready to talk about that, with the PPT. So.
Yeah, and I think it's important to, because you did say exclusionary timeout. So there's, timeout is used for a
That's
variety
the
of different
previous,
things.
yeah, that's the
know.
current
So now the
law.
language
That's
is
the current
timeout.
law. They're wiping out exclusionary timeout and they redefined timeout.
Okay.
Okay, so we need to go to our letter because we use the words exclusionary timeouts multiple times.
Yeah.
And the one that
Because that was
Jeff,
new, Susan. In the
yeah.
previous one, that was still in there, and now they wiped it out, and they did like a find and replace all, and put wherever it was exclusionary timeout, they put it as timeout and redefined it.
So
And
should
did
we
the
be looking
CSD
at
have a
a-
response to that particular part about changing exclusionary timeout? Because I felt like that was a good definition. It was a very clear definition. Do we feel like timeout as it's written in here is appropriate? Or did you guys make like a recommendation?
It's a good question. I mean, I do. I mean, I think I agree with you, Jen. I think the previous definition was very clear, and there was a delineation between seclusion and the exclusionary timeout. But yeah, now it's a little more broad, I would say.
Yeah, so that's my concern.
Yeah.
Is what are we gonna miss if that is so broad?
Yeah.
So could our recommendation be to keep the term exclusionary timeout? And if they need to include other, I don't know, I don't understand why they changed it, I guess.
So the old language defined exclusionary timeout as a temporary, continuously monitored separation of a student from an ongoing activity in a non-locked setting for the purposes of calming such student or de-escalating such student's behavior. That was replaced by the term timeout, and that was defined as a behavior management technique that may involve the separation of the student from the group or classroom in a non-locked setting.
That seems so less clear.
Yeah, I mean, a timeout, when I was teaching, you could take a student and say, all right, you're going to go sit down, you're going to go over to Mrs. Wrigley's class for 15 minutes because you can't be in here. It's a timeout from their classroom, and they're going into another class that's going on, and they're being removed from this one. That's a timeout. I mean, a timeout, they could be sitting in their classroom, but then they have to go sit in the corner of the room someplace where they do not have any interaction with anything else that's going on in the class. There are so many instances of what a timeout is. And so if you want exclusionary timeout where they are, as Jeff said, going into a room that's unlocked, that is supervised, that I understand, that means something different than what somebody else might consider a timeout.
Well, they're not necessarily going to a room that's unlocked, if they're just being separated. So I'm picturing like, out at recess, they're not going to take them off the basketball court, but they're moving them to another section. Or like you said before, even staying in the same classroom, but pulled over to the side.
Yeah, because they're removed from the activity, I believe, right, is what
Right.
is in the definition.
Yeah, do we want to include, so whereas the exclusionary timeout talked about, it talked about separation of student from an ongoing activity in a non-locked setting for the purpose of calming such student or de-escalating the behavior, as opposed to now the new one, timeout, a behavior management technique that may involve a separation. So
May involve.
yeah, may involve.
Which means that
whereas,
it's not necessarily separated. To me, I'm interpreting that as the student can take space in the classroom
Yeah,
and be in timeout, especially our younger population of students.
right.
Right.
But I think you're right that there's a lot of,
And
It's
then
just-
maybe
it's
like
doc-
just more
multiple
broad.
levels of time, like almost like
Yeah.
there's multiple levels of timeout. So here's the thing though, it doesn't seem like if you're pulling them aside as a behavior management technique, I don't know, it doesn't feel like it's to help them calm down or de-escalate. But that's what the assumption is. It's that fine line of, you know, where is it discipline and where is it a break, or, you know, to
Yeah.
calm yourself down.
I mean, part of the management aspect is a removal of attention. You know, it's like to remove the attention of peers or remove the attention from adults that the student's getting. Or the other piece was really about de-escalation and calming a student that's either escalating or dysregulated. So it's definitely different. The
Mhm.
definition is, and it is, I think the field as it's written will have a difficult time as it's written, understanding what to report and what not to report.
yeah, seems like they almost need a guidance of a chart, if
But
there's such a thing.
yeah, so I think
Get up and walk.
So,
So-
so would our recommendation be to like more clearly define timeout,
Well,
or
the
to go
question I
back
have-
to exclude the language of exclusionary timeout, or differentiate between exclusionary timeout and timeout?
Well, let me ask you a question. So whereas the exclusionary timeout, where it talked about the actual removal as opposed to the timeout, which would be the possibility of a removal, you know, using the word may, but under exclusionary, it had a purpose there, for the purpose of calming such student or de-escalating such student's behavior. Would it be worthwhile to reinsert that along with the timeout? So it would say timeout means a behavior management technique that may involve the separation of a student from the group or classroom in a non-locked setting for the purpose of calming such student or de-escalating such student's behavior. Would that be helpful or no? I'm not a teacher.
I already lost like what you were saying by the time you finished saying it.
Okay, so let's put it this way. Let me get it straight. So exclusionary timeout, the laws that currently stand, talked about what action you were going to take, but it included for the purpose of calming, blah, 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 blah. They're removing that and they're substituting the concept of a timeout. And it says, it refers to it as a behavior management technique, where you're going to separate the student. It may involve, not necessarily involve, but it doesn't include for the purpose of calming such student or de-escalating such student's behavior. But it does say refer to a behavior management technique, which is maybe broader and encompassing. You're saying, the gist of what I'm getting from you as far as. the
it
term
sounds
calm-
like, Jeff, that like from the council or, you know, from the committee's perspective is that there's not an understanding of why that definition was changed, that there's agreement around the reporting aspect of it, but not but trying to understand the change in the definition. Right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the
So-
definition isn't, I don't think it's clear enough for districts to know what to document, what not to document, or for families to know what should be documented or not documented. It's
So
too
we
weak.
should give
you
them
had
the
asked
original
about-
language, right? The correct, we should put in the definition that was there, that was existed originally, and say, this is the definition that existed, the one.
Yeah, that's
everyone's
up
been
to
working
you all,
off of.
but that, I mean, that could be a recommendation that you'd say you don't see a need to change. You suggest keeping the definition as was, or redefining timeout to this. I mean, I don't know if you have time to try to wordsmith what they have to try to give a suggestion. That's always an option as well.
Well, I
And
can
then
say-
the only other thing I would say is what really I keyed in here is behavior management technique versus emergency, because there are several behavior management strategies that aren't in the legislation. So I'm just wondering, like, at the essence, does it go more to Jen's concern about parents worried about their students missing multiple or, minutes, hours of instruction without knowing about it, versus a procedure that is an emergency response to safety? So I don't know if I'm articulating that perfectly, but in the legislative language, they group timeout with restraint and seclusion everywhere. and they're very different procedures. That's all. So
Well, this is-
that's, I think it needs to be worked through a little bit more and to try to, but I know this process moves quickly.
But we do know
Sorry,
that
Jeff.
number one, as far as I think what we could do without wordsmithing, as you said, Brian, is we could sit there and make a suggestion that there needs to be more clarity regarding what constitutes a timeout. How is that? Hello?
I don't know.
Or do you want to have us put
I almost just
suggest
say
substitute language?
leave the old language of exclusionary timeout, but I don't know.
The current language of exclusionary timeouts is more thoroughly defined and should be kept as written. How's that?
But we agree with the documenting it.
Wish
And
we were typing
reporting.
on it.
Yeah.
Training on
Well-
Microsoft?
Isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Because we could just be tapping along right now.
This
So,
team share, you're talking about the shared Teams drive?
Yeah,
Yeah.
How we got it so messed up for the annual report.
Absolutely.
Regarding the reporting thing that we talked about, so we do know that pursuant to the law as it stands, that they're going to record each instance of the three, specify whether the use of seclusion was in accordance with it, and we're going to delete that part right there. Specify the nature of the emergency that necessitated the use of the physical restraint or seclusion or timeout, and include such information in an annual compilation on its use of such restraint, seclusion, timeout. That's just kind of talks about, and then going back to the notice to the parent, when it's talking about, let me just get to that part. And shall make each local shall have a telephone, and the student is placed in timeout 3 times of them, shall provide such parent with a detailed summary of the events leading up to and during such a physical restraint, seclusion time, including names of witnesses, seclusion timed out, and explanation of the reasons. Should we also include their start and stop times? Because Jen was talking about how there's no document. I mean, you could have a person secluded for like 5 minutes and a person secluded for 50 minutes, but they're not asking that we have a documentation as far as time. Would that be important to include?
They do currently have that on the reporting for restraint and seclusion.
They do, yes.
So
Okay.
it should say
And if,
start and end time, how long.
If a seclusion or a restraint is longer than 15 minutes, an administrator or a designee trained has to approve that.
Right, okay, I think they're switching it from, yes, okay, I see that, that's in subsection F. In any instance of
Yep.
physical exclusion exceeds 15 minutes. So is it worthwhile to collect the data then? Well, I'd leave it up to you guys, the professionals.
Sorry, I don't know what you're asking there,
My
Jeff.
question is, we do know that if the restraint or seclusion exceeds 15 minutes, then there's certain requirements that have to take place, that an administrator or school health official, whatever, has to okay the continued use. There's no requirement that the length of time that the person is put in a restraint, seclusion, or timeout be kept. Is there? I don't know. I haven't seen it.
I don't know about the language of the law, but I know that because of the definition of restraint and seclusion, like so like if you're counting restraints, if there's a certain amount of time in between, right? Like if you had a student in a hold, but then a minute passed and then you had to hold them again, that would count as 2 restraints. Is that right, Brian?
Yes.
So
And then there's like
currently,
the 15 minutes and then every 30 minutes thereafter.
yeah, so they do have to document the times already for restraint and
Okay.
seclusion. So
Alright.
each stop and start time, so it's already part.
Okay, do you want to include that for a timeout or no? Jen, I thought you were talking about how parents were complaining that they might have been told their kid was in a timeout, but you don't know how many times per day and for how long.
Yeah, they already have it in the language, right? That they have to report on the timeouts as well. So I think our only point was really the
That there was no-
definition was too vague.
Okay, so we want to have that, all right, so I can work on something like that, okay.
And we're at the top of the hour, everybody, just to let you
Yeah,
know.
I know. All right, how about if I take what we talked about here, and I try to throw something together, okay, and I'll pass it around to everybody, is that okay?
Talking to no one.
It happened again, Susan.
You're muted again.
Your magic mouse keeps hitting mute.
Still, sorry, I'm not gonna swear, I'm not gonna say squirrels. If we all had access to one document, it would be so much easier when we did these meetings, we'd be typing all the information and be able to, working on this one document. And then I think it would move like that. It's my own personal.
Yeah, if we could try to support that in the next meetings, just to have a note taker that you can see.
Yeah.
You kind of go through the different sections. But I think Jeff, like for document continuity, Jeff has the main document,
Mhm.
adding his notes, like he said, incorporating that in. But I know you've used like a Google Share Doc in the past too, so you're always welcome to do that. And then Teams will have to work through, because not all of you are some of you would have outside of access to Teams. So we could try to work with our technology department to set that up, but then for Google doesn't work for the CSDE side of things.
Right.
So we'll work through that. But if there are different ways that we can help, support logistically your meetings, just let us know. We're happy to do that.
Thank you so much. That's wonderful.
Of course.
Let me, rather than actually drafting the letter, why don't I submit something to everybody with the points to be included in a draft? And then people can add or emphasize what they want to have, and then we can put together a letter. How would that be?
Sure.
Thank you for doing all that. Yeah. And thank you, Jeff, because this is a lot of work and a lot of brain power. So thank you.
Well, let me, I had the temerity to take yesterday. Oh, I got to tell you, I went to go off the record. We're off the record at this point. So let's just add.
Wait,
you have to adjourn.
Close.
We're
You have
gonna
to-
say we're gonna adjourn the meeting. I don't know if we have to take. We can add. We didn't even have really a quorum, so this is more of kind of like a conversation. But we're gonna adjourn the meeting of the. We have a.
You have it. You can ask for a motion. I know you have a couple
Yes.
members on, so you could still ask for a
Yes.
motion, Jeff. to-
Okay, so we're gonna ask for a motion. A motion. to
I'll make a
adjourn.
motion to adjourn the meeting.
Second.
I'll second it.
All right,
Missy
all
always
in
gets to do
favor?
it, so I'll do it.
Aye. Okay. We're adjourned. Thank you so much.
There you go.
Thank you.
12:03.
Thank
Great
you,
job,
Matt.
Jeff.
All right,
Thank
thanks,
you.
guys.
Thank
I
you,
took-
Matthew.
I took my son yesterday to the Neil Simon Theater.